to have eye contact with my audience and to keep them engaged by interacting with them, by asking questions, for example. Based on the feedback I got last week, I made another learning goal, which was to make my presentations more structured by using a table of contents, and to also make it more scientific. So that's what I did for this presentation. This presentation is, again, it's going to be about food, since I'm a nutrition and health student. And this time it's going to be about coffee. We did an assignment on coffee in the first period of this year, so diet and cancer, and we had to make a guideline for coffee consumption. So first, I'm going to tell you guys something about nutrition research, about coffee and cancer. Then I'd like to tell you about how we performed our research and how we did it, what we did. Then I'll tell you about what we found, and I'll discuss those results, and this will lead to a conclusion. So nutrition research. Why do we do nutrition research? Well, much like this cup of coffee made out of Lego, our body consists of different parts, which consist of small parts, which consist of small parts. But unlikely to this cup of coffee is that our body is continually changing. This cup of coffee will always be the same, will consist of the same parts. But our body is continuously changing. We have proteins, we have fats, we have carbohydrates, like I told you guys last time, and they are continuously being replaced. And to do that, and also these parts are continuously interacting with each other, they're talking. So, and this takes energy. For energy, we need food, and we need the materials to build new parts. And food is not all the same. It's like, it matters what you eat, because not all foods are appropriate to use for building new Lego blocks. So you can basically say you are what you eat. Different foods have different effects on our health, and also on disease. And one of the diseases that are commonly occurring these days is cancer. And diet has a major effect on cancer. And so one of these dietary components that affect our risk of cancer is coffee. So let me ask you guys, who of you guys drinks coffee? Okay. And who of you guys thinks coffee is healthy? You do? Well, it's very good for you, because I did not, you don't believe coffee is healthy? Well, that's what I thought. And then we investigated the role of coffee, and actually it turned out that coffee is actually beneficial and reduces the risk of cancer. Yay! Yeah. So that's good. Good for the coffee drinkers, not so good for people who really don't like coffee, like myself. So yeah, I was quite skeptic. So what I did with my group members, we dove into the literature and we tried to find information about coffee and health. We used the medical data bank, which it's called PubMed, and we used some keywords: coffee, health, cancer, and magnesium. So what we did, we tried to find some studies that investigated the effect of coffee on health. The point is that it's really hard to investigate the effect of coffee on cancer, because cancer is a very complex disease that takes years and years to develop. So it's really hard to do those studies. So we have the World Cancer Research Fund, and they also examine the effect of food on the risk of cancer, and we use their they also summarize the results of studies done, and we use their report. Also, the World Cancer Research Fund makes recommendations, and because it's very hard for people to eat healthy, because we don't always know what's healthy and what's not. So that's why it's important to have dietary guidelines, which was we were trying to make. So therefore we looked at different kinds of studies. You can see here in this pyramid that there are different kinds of studies. And you can see here down in the bottom are the ones least reliable, and the ones at the top are very reliable and very, well, the strength of the evidence is the highest. And you can see here the in vitro research. That's research done in human cells. For example, they exposed breast cancer cells to coffee, and then they see what happens. Do the cells die? Do they survive? And it turns out, I found one study that exposed breast cancer cells to coffee, and those cells died, so that's good news. But there's just one cell, and it doesn't really mean a lot, because those cells could die for different reasons, or, well, simply it doesn't work. It may not work the same way in the body, because there's also a lot of regulators involved there. Next up is animal research. They would just give some animals coffee, and then they have a control group which do not receive coffee, and then they see which ones develop cancer and which don't. It's very commonly used, because it's not because you can't just use it on humans if you don't know what happens. But it's maybe not as reliable, because animals are not the same as humans. The next up is, these are human studies, and they have different ways to examine those. You can do a retrospective study, like the case control study. They find people who have cancer, people who do not have cancer, and then ask them about their coffee consumption. So if people who do not get cancer are coffee drinkers, and people who got cancer did not drink coffee, there might be a link. Also, a cohort study is where they follow people, and they just ask them to fill out a yearly questionnaire about their coffee consumption. So, and then way in the top we have reviews and meta-analysis. That's where they summarize the results of all of these kind of studies. And you can imagine if multiple studies come up with the same results, that really, well, means that coffee might actually be working. So does it work? Well, this is what we found. We found that coffee may have a protective effect against colorectal cancer and endometrial cancer, which are cancer in the large intestine and in the uterus. And well, that also makes cancer a very hard disease to study, because there's several different kinds and have different ways of developing, because there are several possible mechanisms One is because of the antioxidant properties of coffee. This means that oxidants induce damage to our DNA, and if our DNA gets damaged, that might cause cancer. And what these antioxidants do, they counteract these antioxidants. That's what they're called. But there are several possible mechanisms, and we're still not quite sure how coffee would reduce the risk of cancer. I also thought, well, I was still not convinced that coffee actually works. So I thought, well, maybe it's good for cancer, but what about heart disease? What about your blood pressure? Because that might also increase because of coffee. So I dug into the literature, and what I found is that coffee does increase blood pressure, but only on a short-term basis. In the long run, the body compensates for this effect, and no, the blood pressure does not increase on the long term. So that's good news. I was very surprised, but I did not find any proven adverse effects of coffee. So that's good news. I can show you here, this is a table of our results. It might look a bit complicated, but it's just a summary of different studies we found, just like these cohort studies in different countries. And you can see here what they found. Lower risk of endometrial cancer here. And no adverse effects. So that's all very good. We also looked at the dosage of coffee. And it shows here that you have to drink quite a lot of coffee to get these effects. And well, there's some other things I'll discuss later. And well, this table also shows the results for colorectal and endometrial cancer. As for the discussion, I know how you guys drink your coffee, but a lot of people add milk and sugar to their coffee. And sugar, well, we discussed that last week, is not very healthy. So it's something you have to take into account when you advise people to drink coffee, because people will also add milk and sugar to their coffee, which is not as healthy. Another thing with these studies, as I said, cancer research is very hard to do because it develops over a really long time. And but the thing about epidemiological studies, you're not sure if you have two groups and one develops cancer and which one doesn't, and one doesn't, and one drinks coffee and one doesn't. You might say, okay, these people drink coffee so they don't get cancer. But maybe there's other factors that also cause cancer, like smoking. And what if people who drink coffee don't smoke, and people who drink coffee do not smoke, and people who do not drink coffee smoke? Then maybe cancer was caused by smoking, and coffee had nothing to do with that. So that's just an example of confounding. It's really hard because everyone does different things. So it's hard to relate one factor to one disease. Also, the mechanism still not clear because there's several possibilities. We think it might be the antioxidant, but there's also other options. Also, we're still not sure if there's an upper limit for coffee consumption, because, well, there probably is, but we don't know how much coffee you can drink before it gets harmful. So these are all things we have to consider as well. But in conclusion, we formed a guideline to drink 3 to 4 cups of coffee, of black coffee per day.